Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I know looks like we're wearing the same clothes as we did last week. That is a total coincidence. It is not last week, it is this week. I am your host, publisher, autistic publisher, Joe Beal.
So, I'm Elly Blue, and I am the editorial director at Microcosm, and this week we're going to talk about editing. What it is, how to do it, how not to do it. That's a really big topic. We're not going to cover all the bases, but we're going to cover some important parts that I think often get left out.
Often, it's the idea that like somebody has been reading books for their whole life and they have a lot of strong feelings about books, that they kind of think that is the same thing as being an editor. They think that having those tastes and opinions gives them the chops to do that work. And in those cases, I use the example that, like you could do your own dental work, very feasibly. You may not want to do your own dental work. You're probably not going to get the same kind of results as a professional doing your dental work. Same thing with your plumbing. Maybe you're a plumber, but in that case, you're a professional. But it is an odd thing where people don't treat editing that way. They treat editing like something that anybody can do by reading something, and editing is like so much more than that.
And what we found here is that editing truly is a technical skill. We treat it almost as part of the marketing department. We're like creating, and I know that sounds like sacrilege, and that's why I say it. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of cultural baggage around editing. It's seen as a high status job. It's always been a very low paid job, and in part that's because it's not seen as real work. It's seen as like something that you go and do if don't want to work, or if you're not suited to other things, or if you want to kind of live a literary and socially elite life, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of cultural associations with editing that associates it with like upper class people who don't need to make a lot of money and are very well connected and are like have a lot of literary cachet, and that's really valued in our society, by some parts of our society. It's really interesting to see that baggage kind of come in and get involved with editing. And so, when we hire new people or when we take on new interns, a lot of people, I would say most people, come to publishing with the idea of being an editor. And a lot of them kind of learn really quickly once they start to do the editing work that that's not actually what they want to do, because it's a lot of grunt work, to be honest.
Crappy job.
It is. It's just a lot of really, really repetitive, difficult work, and you're also needing to negotiate each one with an author who has, and like authors have a whole range of personalities and attitudes to their work, and sometimes they're very easy to work with, sometimes they're difficult to work with, always in different ways. So the editing job is like a combination of like kind of grunt work and like really intense like listening and negotiation skills. And also like you're constantly giving people bad news. Like you constantly have to like figure out how to break it to somebody that the chapter that means the most to them in their book, like it's about their dying grandmother or something,
Doesn't work in that book.
Yeah.
Has no place in that book.
Yeah. It's a hard conversation to have, and then you kind of need to sit with them while they have their feelings about that, and then sometimes they yell at you. And then you kind of still have to go back down to it and like figure out where all the commas should be.
Yep.
And so that's editing. I mean, there's also like really fun aspects to it. Like it's like the developmental editing is kind of like doing a big crossword puzzle, I think.
Let's step back and look at the 4 parts of editing. So first of all, for most publishing houses, your editor does the job of acquisitions, which is like being the golden eyes and the like, mythic visionary of appreciating the next like great thing. And that is also in and of itself a very, very skilled, difficult task, because oftentimes like people will wholly misrepresent themselves on when they send you their manuscript and the way they talk about it, and then to find out things that aren't quite as it was presented to you. And then next is the developmental edit, which is like re-envisioning that manuscript to actually serve its function as best as it can, to give the reader what the marketing promises in the first place. So you're like, if this is the greatest murder mystery of all time in medieval Scotland, you want to make sure that it actually is that, and then has all the parts of story and pacing of a story so that the action does what it needs to do and like engages the brain in the way that you want it to. And then from there, you have line editing, which is going through and making sure that your sentences back up that structure of the whole book at large. And then lastly, you have proofreading, proofing, whatever you want to call it, where you make sure your commas are in the right place, and there's a period at the end of every sentence, or maybe an exclamation part if it's real exciting. And then you make sure it does all the things.
Most publishers actually have another step in there, the copy edit. We are not always so exacting.
And then you would have fact checking as well if you were like real pro. But again, all these things are sort of been like pinched harder and harder as budgets constrict.
We tend to do the fact checking as part of the line editing.
And so, but and really those are different things historically done by different people. But in this day and age, it's you kind of need to make sure the facts are in good order, some degree during acquisitions as well, just so you don't get kind of hornswoggled.
And then every book needs a different level of editing, and it's often hard to know where you'll be putting all of your energy into a book. Is like you'll get an email with a manuscript and you literally won't know whether you're going to need to spend 10 hours
or 1,000,000 hours or 1 hour.
You won't know whether you'll need to spend 10 hours turning around a really intense developmental edit, or whether you'll glance at it for 15 minutes and be able to be like, okay, this can go on to the next stage, or this needs to go back to the author for some like big obvious thing. And
I was going to pull a prop.
Which one?
Don't even tell me it's not here. Aha! So in the case of this book, man, it's really convenient being next to the bookshelf, right, audience? The otter. I have to double that one down in editing. J. Hunter Bennett submitted what was essentially a finished book. I think we probably put like maybe 2 hours of editorial into this.
It was amazing. This has never happened before, and it'll probably never happen again.
So shout out to Hunter.
Yeah, Hunter, thanks.
Who I may have a direct line to know that he watches this, listens to this, but and then you have other cases where you have other books maybe on that same shelf where like we literally had to like rewrite every single line of the book, and that is horrendously time intensive, and then you're still not going to come out with the perfect thing because you're going to introduce new mistakes when you do that.
Every book is different. And yeah, sometimes like we collaborate deeply with the author and we pass back and forth tons of different drafts, and other times they're like, I'm sorry, I just don't have time, like do what you need to do and then let me have a look at it to make sure it's all what I meant to say. And like every situation is different, so you kind of have to constantly be judging that. And then the actual work itself of editing is like very, very brain intensive. It's like, especially the developmental and line edits, it's like running a marathon each time you do a book. I mean, again, everything is different, but I would say the number one editorial issue that needs to be addressed in the books that come to us is the structure. And in part that's because of how we do acquisitions, like we said in another episode of our podcast, which we can link to.
Episode 7.
And like we said in, I can't believe you know that. Okay, I can. Like we said in episode 7 of this podcast, we don't accept full manuscripts most of the time. We accept short pitches. So that means a lot of the time the author hasn't already gone through the work of like structuring and writing a book. They haven't necessarily like workshopped it. They're learning to write as they go a lot of the time, and we're sort of like guiding them through it. So what that means is we have a lot of manuscripts that need a lot of structural work, and that is very much about like, I recommend I use Google Docs to edit, and turning on the navigation pane, the document navigation, and like putting headers in so that they show up in the navigation is really, really helpful for like figuring it out. And then you can be like, oh, okay, this chapter at the end should actually be at the beginning, and this one that's like really long in the middle should actually be completely cut. And then you can kind of go through step by step and make those hard decisions, but you need to like have some idea of what you want the structure to be going in, or you're just going to have a big mess on your hands and spend a lot of extra time. So that is usually the challenge of developmental editing. You also have to just like keep a really good eye out when you're developmental editing for things like, is that introduction actually an introduction? Does it do what an introduction should do, or are you just assuming it does because it says introduction at the top? Stuff like that. Like, your brain wants to believe what you see in the book, and you kind of have to turn off part of your brain and turn on other parts.
Thank you for joining us once again. on People's Guide to Publishing, episode 32. And we will hope that you will join us again next week when we talk about something else. I am your host, Joe Beal, the Autistic Publisher, and this is Elly Blue.
I'm Elly Blue, the editor who doesn't care about grammar. You can find us on the internet at microcosmpublishing.com or microcosm.pub if you want to keep it short and simple. You can also find us on Twitter at microcosm, on Facebook at microcosm publishing, on Instagram at microcosm_pub, and here in Portland on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.